Welcome back, everybody. I am thrilled to have Marcia Eckerd here. I've been so looking forward to this interview. Marcia Eckerd has provided therapy, evaluation, and consultation for autistic individuals since 1985. She serves on the Connecticut ASD Advisory Council and the Board of Directors of neuroclastic.com and on the Clinical Advisory Group of AANE through 2022. She's presented extensively for AANE, the U.S. Autism Association, and Autism Parenting Magazine, National Summit, and a UNESCO-sponsored International Summit on Autism, among many other venues. She's a prolific writer, and her journal articles on diagnosing autistic adults and autistic women are read internationally, and I do mean internationally. She advocates for an updated understanding of neurodiversity and the need for education to recognize autism in undiagnosed women. So please join me in welcoming Marcia.
Thank you.
Yes, she's amazing. And you know, Marcia, that we are moving the needle of understanding around autism and neurodiversity around the world. And we want everybody to be successful in this area, especially women. You are a woman. I am a woman. We have daughters and sisters, and it's very, very important that people understand this area that you are so, so brilliant in. So I want to ask you, what has inspired you to be part of the World Autism Summit?
And I think exactly what you just said, which is that there's a there are new understandings coming out, both from research and most importantly from the autistic community themselves, about what is autism, what does it mean to be autistic, and not as translated by somebody who is neurodivergent, neurotypical and doesn't get it, but from the perspective of being autistic. And especially women, as you said, because women are so often undiagnosed. Women can have as many autistic traits as a man does, but not be diagnosed. And because of that, they're invalidated and they can have a lot of shame, they can struggle, and it's not, but they're thought of as just being crazy, or because after all, you don't look autistic. So I just feel so deeply for the women I work with and the women I evaluate, because it means so much to them to get that self-understanding and to be able to say to other people, here's why I do what I do, and to be understood.
And how do you hope to make the biggest impact in the world around your area of expertise?
Well, it kind of depends on what you mean by big. When I evaluate women, I do it one at a time. But for that person, it can be the biggest thing. People have called it life-changing for them. But in terms of reach, it's my hope that writing and speaking and being on social media will have a large reach, because hopefully a lot of people will hear our message. A lot of people will learn, and that's what I'm hoping to do.
And what is your biggest why for what you do?
My biggest
why?
Mm-hmm. Because I'm empathic, because I have a sense of integrity and a very strong moral standard that things should be right and fair, and things aren't right and fair. I think there's a huge amount of ableism toward autistic people, that there's I'm writing a book right now with Rob Bernstein, basically saying that most kids come through school with PTSD because they're so traumatized by being invalidated over and over. So I feel that so strongly that I want to be part of making change.
Good for you. That's great. I know there are a lot of women out there looking to be diagnosed as autistic. Why is it so difficult for women to get a diagnosis?
Well, I think that the most important thing is that women don't look autistic. The idea of what autistic is like is based on children. It's based, I think I have a slide here I can show. Oh, I have to hit share. Hang on. So what women hear is that you can talk to me, so you can't be autistic. You make eye contact, you can't be autistic. You have a job, you can't be autistic. And most of all, you don't look like Sheldon. And so everybody thinks this is what autism looks like. And typically women don't look like that. And the question is why? Well, here's why. All the research was done on men. Hey, big surprise, right? Isn't that true in everything? So there's a male prototype of what autism looks like. Not all men look like the prototype, but certainly many women don't. And so therefore the expectation is that they are going to look differently. So they walk into a medical office and they get told, well, they get laughed at. I mean, they get humiliated. And there are relatively few people in the mental health profession, I'm afraid to say, or the medical profession, who are even aware of what we're talking about. And they're the ones who hold up the diagnostic manual, and they're the ones who say women don't fit. And I have should I ramble on, or would you? Okay, I'll ramble on. So let me go back to this again. So people, the primary idea from DSM-5 is that the very first criteria is sort of lacking social competency, that you can't have a reciprocal conversation, and you can't, that you can't, that autistic people can't communicate, okay? And that means they assume no social competency, and that's ridiculous, okay? It's ridiculous because, of course, autistic people can speak. And there are some who think autistic people don't even know people think, which is bizarre. And so, and women get told, well, you're talking to me, you're doing fine. Well, women can talk about areas of interest. Women can talk about anything serious. When I do an evaluation of a woman, I talk to her seriously for an hour and a half, and we have a very intense conversation. It's that small talk. It's that social grease stuff where there's no rhyme or reason. One of the women I work with said, we agreed that there should be a T-shirt that says, small talk is stupid and meaningless, but people do it anyway. It's substantive conversations are not a problem. The real issue is the conversation where you're not sure what you're supposed to say, how you're supposed to do it. And this is DSM-5. It's deficit in communicative, but regular communicative behaviors, non-communicative behavior, non-verbal communicative behaviors. So if you smile, if you make eye contact, if you have any kind of expression, then the assumption is that, oh, you can't be autistic. And you have to look at DSM-5 if you're going to look at it with an autistic lens. So when it says you can't do some social communication or you have trouble with it, what that means is most women on the spectrum in unstructured situations, in situations where you have to make small talk, are overwhelmed, stressed, because they're thinking, what am I supposed to do? How do I do it? Am I doing the right thing? Am I saying too much? Am I not saying too much? Am I looking right? And it's exhausting. It is completely exhausting. But to somebody looking at them and functioning in their job, they might say, well, she does fine because she's in a role. She knows what she's doing. She knows what to say. And nonverbal, again, I think I have a slide about masking. And women at a very young age realize that to fit in, they have to, quote, look normal. And so that's learning to mask. And Spectrum Matt gave me permission to use this. There's the person who you really are and the person you have to be to survive.
Mhm.
And masking is often what you need to do to survive. You have to sort of look as non-autistic as you can. But number one, that's exhausting. It takes an enormous amount of self-monitoring, an enormous amount of self-doubt, an enormous amount of self-effort. Most people have to recover
Mhm.
after having to do that. And it's correlated with depression. And so it's depressing to have to be inauthentic all the time. And some people even lose track of what authentic is because they've been told so often that this is what you're supposed to be. It almost comes automatically. So it's you know, it's that's all not recognized. So if you're masking and you look okay, then you can't be autistic, and mental health professionals just don't get it. And so women have to find the few people who are what I would call neurodiversity affirming, who do get it. And the other thing, which is unfortunate, is how you diagnose this is very much up in the air. And so I have people I hear of who are being referred for neuropsychological testing. Well, this is a clinical diagnosis. It's not a testing diagnosis. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter what your working memory is. I mean, that affects your life, but it doesn't make you autistic or not autistic. Autism is a clinical diagnosis, and people are paying thousands and thousands of dollars for some of the people who do it, and many people can't afford that. So trying to find a reasonably priced person who is neurodiversity affirming is a challenge. And, unfortunately, one that is beyond the means of many people.
I have a question. Um, when I was growing up, we were taught as girls to just sit there and listen because there was a man in the room. I know that's a cultural thing. And I imagine there's a lot of girls that were, quiet on purpose because they were supposed to listen. And maybe that's a way of masking too. But I
Well,
don't.
certainly being quiet is a way of masking.
Mhm.
That one can sort of withdraw, be quiet, not talk.
Mhm.
And my word for that is stay under the foxhole.
Mhm.
You just sort of don't stick your neck out.
Right.
But women also, I have one woman that I interviewed and I loved it the way she put it. She said when she goes out in the morning, she puts on her Disney princess mask. So she's bright and she's bubbly and she has that smile on, and it's exhausting, but that's kind of her way of doing it. And so there's both the more active girls and women describe studying videos, they study social media, they study the popular kids, they may even adopt their exact expressions, or somebody does this, they start doing this, just to have a repertory of what is it that people do.
Mhm.
And so it's exhausting.
You bet it is. Okay. How many women do you think are out there looking to be diagnosed?
I can't give any kind of number. If
Just guessing.
they're saying that there's a ratio of about 1 in 4 of women to men. If you look at some of the more recent research, it's probably closer to 2 to 1. And that's only counting the people who are diagnosed. And as I said, research has shown that women can have as many autistic traits as men and still not be diagnosed. So that's an awful lot of people out there if you think about it as 1 in 34. And women, as you said, are expected to be quiet. They're expected to be people pleasers. They're expected to be submissive. There are all these gender stereotypes. And so girls who are outspoken, girls who have black and white kinds of thinking, girls who have sensory sensitivity are seen as rude, drama queens, oppositional. They're not seen as autistic.
Mhm. That's crazy. Why is getting a diagnosis important to women?
I think it's important for a lot of ways. One is that women who are on the spectrum have a sense of being different. They know other people kind of seem to naturally do things they just don't work for them. And one mother described how when she's waiting at the bus stop with her kids, all the other mothers just form groups, and the question is, how do they do that? And so there can be a sense of shame that everybody else does something, and I, no matter how hard I try, I don't seem to be able to do it. It can impact. So there's a lack of self-understanding, not knowing how to. Many women tell me they want a diagnosis to let themselves off the hook of blaming themselves for so much. But also, many women don't know aspects of what's going on in their primary relationships. They don't understand why do they, the husband says, well, you should know this. Well, if you're on the spectrum, no, you shouldn't know it if he didn't say it, or taking things literally, or, having a routine, or even just being socially awkward. It's why don't you want to go to his office Christmas party when in fact you'd rather die, than do that. And also work environments. I mean, I've had women who have been in dreadful work environments. They're noise sensitive and light sensitive, and and they have enormous social stress. And there they are in a hospital, which is noisy and light and constant people. And, and you say to them, well, and they just feel it's their fault. Everybody else is doing it. I should be able to do this. So for self-knowledge, for one's relationships, to pick a good occupational choice and environment, and to be able to advocate for yourself in that environment, you really need to understand yourself and help others understand you.
It must help with their self-esteem as well.
I find that, most women who come to me looking for a diagnosis are actually hoping for one, because then things would make sense. And ideally, they can begin to let go of that sense of failure. And what I always tell them is, it's the definition of autism is that it's an aberrant neurodevelopmental path. So there's something wrong with you. When they talk about you have autism, it sounds like having measles or something. Whereas if you can be an autistic person, a person who processes, who experiences the world, who thinks in an autistic way, and you're autistic, then you're not a broken PC, you're a Mac. And you can be a perfectly fine Mac. And someone seeing herself that way, she's a perfectly fine who she is that can be really, really a relief.
She can start discovering her gifts, strengths, and talents and pursuing them with vigor and enthusiasm.
Right. And, she can appreciate her gifts. And we talk about that, recognizing her strengths. One of my favorite questions when I interview people is, are you always 5 miles ahead of everybody else? And everybody goes, yeah. And I say, and that's not always appreciated, is it? And then I go, no. And, to realize that your ability to see things, your ability to anticipate, to see patterns, and even to be logical and analytical, those are all gifts. Those are all things that, are real advantages. So that, to appreciate one's advantage, and also to be validated about, even if you don't look what people expect, you are very caring. You do really have enormous integrity and responsibility, and, feeling about issues that aren't recognized. And so it sort of validates the positive parts you can like about yourself.
Yes.
That truthfulness is a good thing.
I like the fact that, autistic women can be trailblazers and do things their own way. And it doesn't matter what other people think, like I was telling you the story about my daughter-in-law, where she chose to embrace the logic in her job description of, well, I don't want to work as hard, but I can make more money by not working as hard. And other people can't get their heads around that, but she did. So I think, examples like that are really powerful.
Well, and also a woman can follow her special interest and have, Simon Baron-Cohen now says he's done some research that many autistic people aren't that fond of, which I agree with. But his most current book on the pattern seekers talks about the autistic way of processing as driving the progress of humanity. That, as you said, women and men both can be the ones to kind of create new ideas, to create new inventions, to sort of, you're not held back by the expectations of your social group. So, or the, or groupthink,
Right.
so that you can dive into something and really come out with something. Or you and I, for example, can be strong and do what we're doing and seem unusual as in the gender expectation of, I've had people tell me I'm not terribly feminine, and it's like, who cares?
Okay. It's all good. We are who we are, and we
Right.
love who we are.
Yeah. And so, I'm sure that I'm not saying this as a clinician. I'm just saying that there are people who have felt that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was on the spectrum. She had an enormous interest, as you know, in the law regarding women and women's work. And she smiled so infrequently, apparently her children kept a journal of when she smiled. And they had to drag her away from work. We all know she became a superstar, in her older ages, but, for a long time, she was totally, task focused and had to be dragged off to do anything else. And everyone knows about her exercise routine. She certainly had routines. And so is she? I don't know, but I'm just saying extraordinary. There are many autistic people who are extraordinary. Just as there are many autistic people, like neurotypical people, who are ordinary. We have the same gamut as everybody else.
That's true. That's really a good point. What's masking? Why isn't it a good thing to come across as typical?
Well, as I said, girls at a very young age realize that they're not being accepted, they're different. And so a girl will observe other girls like I described before, or watch movies or watch television, or, some other representation of what they feel is normal. And they will try to, mimic those behaviors, sometimes very well, sometimes not quite as well. So they come off as different and awkward.
Mm-hmm.
There was one girl who really tried her hardest to do what the other girls were doing. And then the girls all refused to sign her yearbook. And she knew that she was devastated. But it's, so a masking takes an enormous amount of effort. And the fundamental message is that you have to be something other than what you are. You have to think and not, and everybody else can just be, and you can't just be. And ultimately that's correlated, as I said, with depression. And there's even some correlation, it's not necessarily causal, with suicidal ideation, especially in bright women.
Mm-hmm.
Because a bright, say, teenage or young adult woman is sort of at the peak of when you're going to be masking.
Right. Why is it important for women to know they're autistic and learn about it?
Well, as I said, self-knowledge is empowering.
Mm-hmm.
It lets you make good choices. And it also helps you kind of understand what strengths you had, as you said, and also what vulnerabilities you might have. For example, autistic people often are quite truthful. Well, being truthful isn't always appreciated. If someone asks you a question, or if you're honest about your perceptions. I just had a woman yesterday where there was a discussion of who was going to be the medical director at her clinic. She's a pediatrician, and she recommended against somebody who was actually her friend, but she didn't think she'd make a good leader. Well, that didn't do much for their friendship, and it got perceived as undermining and all these other things when she was simply being truthful. So understanding that kind of thing, also understanding that when you spent your whole life being told, do as you're told, that can put you at risk for being gaslighted, and it can put you at risk for even being abused, because you're told, well, if you didn't understand the situation you were getting into, it's your fault, and this is what you should do. I mean, this sounds funny, but it was serious. I met one woman who got married 4 times because she thought when someone said they wanted to marry her, she had to say yes. On the 4th husband, she figured out that she had to like him.
Oh,
But seriously, that idea that you're supposed to say yes, that other people know better than you are, leaves you open to all kinds of harassment, but that you don't even recognize as harassment. And women don't have the social, necessarily have the social group, the social milieu to kind of give you what are the red flags that someone doesn't mean well. You know, what guys are bad news, or how can you tell when someone has ideas that you wouldn't want or welcome in terms of behavior towards you. There's also autistic girls and boys grow up, go through puberty, and have the same sexual feelings as other people, and yet if they're defined as autistic, the thing is, I'm focusing most on all that and not on your sexuality. Yet people are sexual, they have sexual desires, and so getting appropriate education for one's safety is really important, and to know that I may have missed some of that, and I have to learn about what are red flags. And I have to learn that I have the right to have boundaries and say no.
right.
You know,
I know
that's all critical.
our kids can be extreme targets, totally, because they don't know the word no, and they don't understand that vulnerability. And a lot of kids are targeted. A lot of, especially girls, are targeted that are naive. They don't understand that, exactly what you're saying. They don't understand how.
Well, and also, and again, this is a pattern for men as well as women. I'm not trying to say it's not true for men, but a lot of times if a woman, for example, a young woman is in college, and she wants to fit in, and all of the kids are going out, I call them kids, even though they're 20 something, are going out drinking, or they're going to parties, or they're going to concerts. And the only way she can do that is to use substances or get slightly drunk. And then she's not, she's less inhibited and more, more comfortable in a social situation. But being drunk or stoned, she's not necessarily going to make good decisions.
Right.
And so using alcohol to sort of relax, to be in social situations, also can be a setup for ending up somewhere you wouldn't want to end up.
That's true. That is very true. And these kids are vulnerable. So that's a good point. Tell me about how you've helped people around the world. I know you were talking about people in Africa and Asia and other places have been, tuning into your work. I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, it really blows my mind, because my work is published on a number of academic research sites. This is my professional articles. And I get, where it's being read in Vietnam, or, Singapore, or Chile, or, Monaco, or, Cape Town. And I'm like, really? But I wanted to write these 2 articles, one on diagnosing undiagnosed adults, and one on diagnosing women. And this was sort of going beyond the typical diagnoses, because obviously these people haven't been diagnosed because they don't match people's prototype. So I was sort of talking about things that have been researched, but then in a professional article, sort of sticking my neck out and saying, okay, this is how I do it. This is how I understand this. And I had a lot of support and help from Tony Atwood, who I just sat down with him during a conference. He gave me his lunch hour, and we talked about how do we understand people who don't fit the criteria. And so I wrote 2 papers on diagnosing, women and diagnosing adults, basically doing all of this stuff. If you don't know what these folks look like, and they're not going to meet your expectations. So they're not going to look like Sheldon. They're not going to seem awkward and robotic necessarily. And so I really was putting myself out there, but so many people have responded because this is something where there's no guide. This is something where there isn't, a test or a handbook saying, okay, here's what you look for. And most of it's not in the DSM, or it's much more nuanced than the DSM.
Well, this is
Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for everybody who is not either in the US or, the US, as everyone knows, has its own peculiarities, and the rest of the world uses a different classification. They call the ICD-10, ICD-11. The US, our psychiatrists say, no, we have to do our own. But it's basically the same thing, which is there's official criteria, but you need to have a nuanced understanding of it. And so it's just critical that we get this out there. And I'm just so excited that so many people are reading this, and it will be like, I'll see it's read in Germany, and then I'll see Germany. So I know somebody is passing it around.
That's wonderful. That is so
Yeah.
wonderful. So do you have any other words that you want to say? Any other wonderful wisdom, words of wisdom that you want to get out there?
Oh my, when you ask that, it's always like total blank. I think that it's important for women to affirm their own experience. This is true for everyone. And I mean women inclusively here. I mean everyone. To respect your own experience. And if others aren't validating you, to know yourself. Okay. And realize you're not a broken anything. You're you. And I think that that as a message is such an important message to give people. And if anyone watching this, or if any, every time I talk, people say, oh, well, my family, my cousin, my daughter-in-law, everybody seems to know someone who's wondering if she's on the spectrum. And I in my I'm happy to be in touch with people. I have a list of websites and books, and if you look at Jessica Kingsley Publishers, there's quite a few books written by autistic women, or articles written by autistic women. See if you recognize yourself. Do you know what I mean? See if you learn about it. And you might find that, oh my goodness, this explains so much.
And how about young girls? Like, how do people recognize autism in younger children?
Well, that's problematic, because younger children are usually if a younger child is extreme at the age of 2, loses speech and things like that, people get it. But if a girl is more, if her autism is invisible, if it's on the inside, then we have to think about autism, so that a lot of autistic girls present with eating disorders or depression or anxiety. And one of the things that when someone presents that way, you have to think about is, could she be on the spectrum? Or a girl who has behavior that, rather than calling her oppositional or calling her rude or calling her avoidant, think about ask her, or try to figure out with her what else is going on. I had one girl, for example, who, when in Spanish class, she would always put her head on her desk, or she would draw. And there was a plan, if she's drawing, one prompt, and then they take it away from her. and they took her drawing away from her, and she, put her head down and started crying. And the teacher said, well, you can leave and go to the nurse if you're sick. Well, the problem was she had extreme auditory sensitivity. It was an incredibly loud class. It was almost impossible for her to tolerate. And there was a lot of social demand because they were always expected to pair up and speak Spanish to each other. And she often got paired with boys who were very rude and would say things to her that were offensive to her. And so it was just a social and environmental disaster for her to be in there. And so the way she self-calmed was to draw. So nobody got that. And nobody ever suspected that she was anything other than attention-seeking and avoidant. So we really have to look at girls and have, could she be on the spectrum, come into our minds? Because right now it doesn't. But unfortunately, a lot of what are considered the gold standard tests miss autistic girls because they can mask.
Very, very helpful. You have been a wealth of information, Marcia. I really appreciate everything you said. And I know a lot of girls and women and men are going to be out there paying very close attention to what you have to say. And there's a lot of people wondering, So thank you so much for being part of the summit. And we love you.
Oh, well, thank you so much for asking me.
Okay. So thank you.